Hello, this is a recording of a presentation that I gave at the Nautical Archaeology Society Conference in Portsmouth, England on the 16th of November 2025. My name is Neil Burgess. I'm the president of the Shipwreck Preservation Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm going to talk to you today about recovering an artifact to tell the story of a Canadian Liberator bomber that crashed in Newfoundland, Canada in the Second World War. This project was collaborative with many partners who are listed here, and I'll talk about those partners as we go through the project. So to provide a little context for what this story is about, here's a map of the North Atlantic where the Battle of the Atlantic took place in the Second World War. And we have Portsmouth on the right, Portsmouth, England, where we're now at the NAS Conference. I'm going to talk to you about Newfoundland. The island of Newfoundland is shown there on the western side of the Atlantic. And the Battle of the Atlantic took place between those 2 points. In particular, I'm going to talk about Gander, which was the site of a large Allied air base that was critically important in the war for a number of reasons. What Gander is most famous for is it was the jumping off point from North America for multi-engine planes to fly across the Atlantic to Britain in the Second World War. And there were more than 100,000 aircraft built in Canada and the United States that needed to get across the Atlantic to join the war in Europe. And Gander was one of the most important air bases in that transit over to Britain. But today I'm going to talk about another aspect of Gander, and that's the anti-submarine squadron that was based there that played a major part in the Battle of the Atlantic. So this map shows the convoy routes across the Atlantic from the eastern United States and eastern Canada going to Britain. These convoys were absolutely essential to the war effort, taking food, raw materials, troops, and weapons across the Atlantic to Britain to enter into the war in Europe. Those convoys were made up of dozens of merchant vessels, and they were American, British, and Canadian, and merchant vessels from many different countries. And they were escorted across the Atlantic in large part by the Canadian and Royal Navies and the American navies as well later in the war. Now, the challenge they faced getting across the Atlantic was German U-boats, and the Germans produced at first hundreds and later thousands of these U-boats whose mission was to sink as much merchant shipping coming across the Atlantic as possible and try to starve Britain of food, reinforcements, and war material. And up until the middle of 1943, the Germans were winning this Battle of the Atlantic. They were sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could build replacements, and the Allies were woefully unsuccessful at sinking German U-boats, as I said, up until the middle of 1943. We're going to talk in particular about a Royal Canadian Air Force squadron, number 10 Bomber Reconnaissance Squadron, that was based at the air base at Gander. And their role was anti-submarine patrols over the North Atlantic. And number 10 Squadron upgraded to consolidated Liberator bombers in the spring of 1943, and that had a huge impact on their success in protecting convoys going across the Atlantic because the Liberator had much greater range than the previous aircraft they were using, which were Lockheed Hudsons. And to illustrate that, again, here's the map showing Gander. There's the Liberator bomber that changed the game in the Battle of the Atlantic. And it had a range of almost 3,000 nautical miles, so that it could go out 1,000 miles and then patrol for hours and hours looking for submarines before having to head back to base. And as you can see, the planes going from Gander could go halfway across the Atlantic and do their patrols. So when you consider that the Canadian and British Air Force had similar squadrons in Iceland, in Britain, in Northern Ireland, and in the Azores, they could provide complete coverage of the North Atlantic and try to keep the U-boats from being successful in attacking convoys. And as I said, the squadron got these Liberators in early 1943, and from then on, the U-boats started to lose the Battle of the Atlantic. So I'm going to talk about one of these Liberators in particular, and it was Liberator 589, D for Dog, from number 10 Squadron in Gander. It normally flew anti-submarine patrols over the North Atlantic. Its last flight, it took off at night to do a night practice flight on September the 4th, 1943. Eyewitnesses saw the plane climb from the runway and then barrel roll several times, stall, and crash into Gander Lake. Unfortunately, the three Canadian airmen and the passenger were all killed in that crash. That's a picture of Wing Commander John Young, who was the commanding officer of number 10 Squadron. His co-pilot was Flight Officer Victor Bill, and the flight engineer was leading aircraftsman Gordon Ward. Their passenger was a doctor, an Air Force doctor who was doing medical research on hearing loss. And unfortunately, he picked this flight to go up and do some sound measurements on the plane. Immediately after the crash, Canadian Navy divers were flown to Gander, and they spent 10 days diving on the aircraft wreck, trying to recover bodies and to recover the aircraft for a crash investigation. Those divers were able to recover the body of the doctor, Squadron Leader Mackenzie, who's in the picture here, but not any of the other three who were on the flight deck. And they were unable to put cables around the aircraft so that it could be recovered. So after 10 days of diving, the divers were withdrawn because the person in charge figured he was at great risk of losing one of the divers. And I'll talk about that, the challenges they faced in a minute. So the body of Squadron Leader Mackenzie was buried in the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery in Gander. And that's a picture of his headstone there. So nothing more was done with his airplane wreck after the diving in 1943 stopped. We're going to fast forward to the present day. The Shipwreck Society member Tony Merkel grew up in Gander and had heard a lot of stories about this plane crash, and he spent the previous 9 years researching this crash, finding the RCAF crash reports, finding war diaries from the squadron and the base. And he provided us with a rough location, a lat long, of the wreck site in Gander Lake from the RCAF crash report. So full marks to Tony for doing all the background research to make this project go ahead. Kirk Regular at the Marine Institute in 2022 had a multibeam sonar survey vessel on Gander Lake doing a contract for a gold company, Newfound Gold, and he was surveying the bottom of the lake for that mining company, and he finished the project early, and he asked the mining company if he could go up to take the survey boat up to the other end of the lake and look for our plane crash. Kirk's a member of the board of the Shipwreck Society, and we had filled him in on this plane crash before he took off to Gander Lake. So after a quick search, Kirk was able to locate the plane wreck using the multibeam sonar in June, near the end of June in 2022. And that's a picture there of the multibeam image of the plane wreck. And you can see the wings, you can see what looks like the nose, but not a lot of detail other than that in this image. In September, with the help of Rick Stanley and Ocean Quest Adventures, a team of technical divers, including myself, Tony Merkel, and other members of the Shipwreck Society, dove on the bomber wreck for the first time. And we faced a number of challenges diving on the wreck. It was more than 41 meters deep. So that's beyond recreational limits. For us Canadian divers, the lake water was dark brown, the color of tea, and that provided very limited visibility, about 2 meters, which for us is very low. Obviously for UK divers, 2 meters is not bad visibility, but for us that was not what we're used to. And because of the depth, obviously we had limited bottom time. And we also faced cold water temperatures. The temperature of the water at the bottom was about 4 degrees. So we did initial diving surveys in 2022. And this is what we found. We found the bomber partially intact, upside down on the lake bottom, as I said, at about 45 meters. And this is what we found. The wing was almost completely intact. The 4 engines had been ripped off the wing and they were missing. And the bottom of the fuselage had been opened up when the plane hit the water, so that there was a lot of damage inside the fuselage, and the tail was missing. We had one tail fin, which is shown on this picture. But what I want to highlight for you is in the nose of the wreck, right where the windows would have been for the bombardier to look out. The windows were gone. They would have imploded in the crash. There was a control box that the bombardier used for releasing the bombs that was sitting all on its own right in the nose of the plane. And after we completed these survey dives, I kept thinking about that control box because it was sitting right there. And I thought, if we recovered that artifact, what a great way it would give us a great lead in to telling the story of this bomber squadron. So that's what the little box looks like. It's about the size of a box of Kleenex, facial tissues. And it was used by the bombardier to control how many bombs were released when he pressed the button and how far apart those bombs were spaced, whether they all fell together or whether they fell as a string when they hit the ground. And these pictures come from Maxwell Hone, who's a videographer, took great video of this wreck when we were doing these first survey dives. Well, after we'd completed the survey dives and documented the wreck, we shared our findings with the Canadian Department of National Defence. Obviously, this is a Royal Canadian Air Force plane. It's a war grave, and we wanted to let them know that we'd found it. I was quite surprised when National Defence got back to us indicating we could recover any artifacts we wanted to from the wreck as long as we got provincial archaeology permits to allow us to do that. And they asked us to treat the wreck as a war grave, which we obviously intended to do. So you can see that the regulatory framework in Canada is vastly different from what you guys have here in the UK or what exists in the United States. So, artifact recovery. I talked with the folks at the North Atlantic Aviation Museum in Gander, who tell the story of the Gander Airport during the war and afterwards. And I asked them if they'd be interested in an artifact from this plane wreck to tell the story, to help develop a new exhibit to tell the story of this wreck. And they were very keen. So in September 2024, Shipwreck Society divers, myself and Chris Power, returned to the bomber wreck to recover the bombardier's control box. And to give you a feeling for what diving in this lake is like, that's a photo of me going down the buoy line to the wreck. And you can see it's pretty much a night dive because the water is so dark. And that was during the day. So we managed to dive down using decompression diving techniques and recovered the artifact from a depth of 41 meters. This is me at my last decompression stop coming up. So again, you can get a feeling for the color of the lake water, which was bog water basically. And there is the bomb release interval control box after we brought it up. And this is a picture that I took before the box underwent conservation treatment at the Department of Archaeology at Memorial University. And here's a picture of the box after Donna Teasdale, who runs the conservation lab, had finished treatment of the box. And you can see a lot of the corrosion has been removed, and she's added a bit of pigment to where the paint has flaked off on the front of the control box. But once it was in this state, it was ready to go to the museum and for the development of the new exhibit. So, using the artifact to tell a bigger story. This NAS conference is about telling stories about nautical history, and in this case, aviation history. And we wanted to tell that story and inform the public. So we had a number of avenues for doing that. We blasted out a whole bunch of social media postings about the initial discovery of the wreck and the first diving surveys on the wreck, and then in 2024 about this successful artifact recovery. We got a lot of news media coverage about the initial discovery and diving and this artifact recovery. And as a matter of course, in Newfoundland, when we get provincial archaeology permits, we write up articles at year end summarizing our findings for the Provincial Archaeology Office's annual review, and that's published online every year. So we've got a couple of write-ups in there about this bomber and the artifact recovery. That's the cover page of the article if you want to look it up. The second way we wanted to tell the bigger story is we were very lucky to collaborate with a TV production company that was filming for episodes of season 3 of a Canadian TV show called Harbour Heroes, which focuses on ocean workers in Newfoundland. And they shot a lot of video of us recovering the artifact on Gander Lake, and then the conservation treatment and taking it to the museum. And that was told in, that became part of 2 episodes of the season 3 of the Harbour Heroes. And that's available online if you want. I believe it's behind a paywall. So, and there's just some shots from the TV show. And the third way we wanted to tell this story was for the artifact to become the centerpiece of a new exhibit at the North Atlantic Aviation Museum in Gander. And that exhibit is under development right now. The exhibit will tell the story of Gander's position in the Battle of the North Atlantic, the anti-submarine role of number 10 Squadron at Gander, and the fate of this particular Liberator, 589, and its crew. And that's a picture of the front of the Aviation Museum in Gander, where this new exhibit will be on public display. Okay, now I'm going to go off script for a minute, and I'm going to talk about something completely different. I love Monty Python, and now for something completely different. I'm going to talk about a Royal Navy submarine that was lost in the Second World War off the south coast of Newfoundland. So this is Royal Navy submarine HMS P514. It was stationed in Newfoundland in June 1942, and it was not an operational submarine that was heading out to sink ships. It was a training boat that was there to train Royal Canadian Navy escort ships in how to use their sonar to detect and destroy submarines underwater. So this submarine would go out on training cruises with Canadian Navy escort ships, and they would practice detecting the submarine with their sonar and then doing depth charge runs with dummy depth charges. So this was a training boat. Now let's talk about its loss. On June 21st, 1942, the submarine P514 was sailing at night along the south coast of Newfoundland in the fog, as is wont to be in Newfoundland, and it crossed paths with a Canadian minesweeper, HMCS Georgian, in the fog at night. And Georgian spotted the submarine on the surface directly in front of the ship. The submarine did not respond to an identification challenge with a Morse lamp, and HMCS Georgian had been told when it started its mission that there were German submarines in this area. So they immediately went to full speed and rammed and sunk the submarine, and there were no survivors in the submarine's crew. So HMS P514 was lost with 42 souls off the south coast of Newfoundland near the village of St. Shots. So a tragic tale of what nowadays we'd call friendly fire, and in those days they called an own goal. And this was not made public until several years after the war, because it was embarrassing for the Allies to sink their own ships. So let's go forward to 2 years ago, when members of the Marine Institute at Memorial University were out doing multibeam surveys of the seafloor, and we gave them the lat long from the sinking report of P514, and they were able to locate it, and they got us this great image of the submarine lying on its starboard side on the bottom in about 50 meters off the south shore of Newfoundland. And this past summer, they were able to go back to the site with an ROV, and I freely acknowledge that the quality of the ROV video was pretty poor. There was a lot of snow. I think they had water in their cable or something, bad connection. But we got some great video images of the conning tower of the submarine and the forward diving plane of the submarine, which both have distinctive features which confirm for us the identity of the submarine as P514. So we've now sent this video and all of our imagery from the sonar to the Royal Navy's Heritage Secretariat, and they're examining it now to make the official confirmation that this is in fact HMS P514 on the bottom. And we hope to get out there this coming year and do some diver surveys with technical divers and hopefully get some much better quality photos and video and possibly be able to do 3D photogrammetry of the submarine. So to just give you an idea, I mentioned that this work's been done by the Shipwreck Preservation Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. You can visit our website at shipwrecksnl.ca. We do a lot of work. Here's another multibeam sonar image from one of our board members of World War II merchant shipwreck that's right near where I live. Our mission is very similar to NAS in the UK. Our mission is to advance the awareness, documentation, and stewardship of shipwrecks throughout our province. Our members include divers, archaeologists, historians, and ocean technology experts, and the public, and we're a registered Canadian charity. Thank you for listening, and we have a question here about the conservation of the control box from the Liberator bomber. So I'll give you a little bit more explanation on that. That again is a picture of the bomb release interval control box that was in the nose of the plane in the bombardier's compartment. The actual object itself has the front faceplate was copper. The other 5 sides were bakelite or a similar plastic resin. There were white metal electrical connectors. You can see one at the bottom right that was heavily corroded. The box was held together with 12 steel bolts, and the size of it, like I said, it was about the size of a box of tissues, 23 by 12 by 9 centimeters. And the conservation treatment included multiple water changes and mechanical removal of the metallic corrosion. A mixture of sodium dithionite, water, and ethanol was used as a reducing agent to inhibit further metallic oxidation. Beva D8 was used to stabilize the friable black paint that was chipping off the faceplate, and a matte medium mixed with carbon black pigment was applied to areas of paint loss to restore the original color of the box for exhibition. Okay, so that's it for my presentation. Thanks a lot for listening. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me through the Shipwreck Preservation Society's website or Facebook page. Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye.